Hey YouTube, welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be doing a brief natal chart investigation, if you will, on Katt Williams, the comedian. Recently he went viral due to an interview that he did with Shannon Sharp on his podcast called Club Shay Shay. I don't know if it's a podcast, it may just be like a YouTube show. But it was a real great interview. It was about 3 hours long, and I actually sat through the whole thing. Katt Williams is very entertaining, and I think Shannon Sharp did a pretty good job at interviewing him and asking the right questions. I'm actually a fan of the comedian Katt Williams. If you were to have asked me who was my favorite comedian, I would always have said Katt Williams. And that's just because when I was a teenager, that's when I was really in my stand-up comedy, phase. And so I think Katt Williams was popular at the time. And so I watched a lot of his stand-ups along with Kevin Hart, Chris Tucker, Chris Rock. I saw a lot of the older videos like that on YouTube. But Katt Williams was always the funniest to me. So when I watched this interview, I was kind of taken aback because I realized that I don't know if I really like Katt Williams, the person. I kept saying he has to be like a Leo rising or something because he's coming across as extremely arrogant. And not all Leos are arrogant, but the way he was kind of laying it on so thick with his self righteousness and referring to himself as a king and all of that. And, the hair thing, I was like, he has to be a Leo rising. So I did go and pull up his chart, and it was actually verified with a AA reading, which is like the highest rating you can get in terms of accuracy for a birth chart. And I have his birthday at September 2nd, 1971 at 5:28 a.m. in Cincinnati, Ohio. So that, would make him as you can see, a Virgo at 18 degrees, 43 minutes. And so that speaks to that bravado that he has. He has a strong need to feel important. Leo wants to be recognized for their work and their accomplishments. And there's a lot of pride interwoven within Leo. So I'm pretty sure you can see that within Katt Williams. He's very prideful, he's very boastful, and he definitely pumps himself up. And Leo, a lot of times you'll hear them use terms like the king or stuff like that because Leo is a sign that is concerned with hierarchy, and it is one of the two royal signs of the zodiac, with Cancer being the other. Now that Leo rising does is a great ascendant for like a public speaker, an entertainer, a performer, somebody who knows how to put on a show. So that's a very strong thing to have working for him. So that can show where he's just a natural when it comes to being entertaining. But some of the more negative traits of Leo, of course, is like the being arrogant, self-righteous, being fixed. It can have a way of talking down to other people. And so I do think that some of his criticism was valid towards some of his peers, like namely Cedric the Entertainer. I can understand how he feels jilted by Cedric the Entertainer to the point where, he might want to roast him a little bit because, you know, that all originates from Katt Williams doing this joke or a segment at the end of one of his comedy specials, and it involves him, driving, I think it's a Cadillac or something, and Cedric the Entertainer kind of ripped him off, and except instead of driving a car, he was driving a spaceship. So stealing jokes, I can understand because that is your intellectual property at the end of the day. So when you have somebody who, and at the time Cedric, I think, was more popular than him, when you have someone more popular than you kind of steal your material and all of that, I can understand why that can make a person feel jilted because, that really wasn't the right thing to do. But some of the other things that he said I found to be like unnecessary, and I felt like he was exaggerating a lot. Now I'll talk about the exaggerating later, but I feel like some of his vitriol that he has towards his fellow peers is mainly coming from the fact that he kind of feels insecure and he is bitter that he wasn't, let into the special club. And I say that for a reason. You'll understand once I get further into the reading. But I think that some of it is unwarranted, especially when he was kind of, I'll say he was mainly coming at a few people, but he used a lot of people as collateral damage, namely Kevin Hart. I think he's a bit envious of Kevin Hart because Kevin Hart is short, just like him. So they're both miniature comedians, and for what it's worth, I guess Kevin Hart has had a much more successful commercial career. His image is a lot cleaner, and he has that crossover appeal and has been in a lot of movies. And I think that for Katt Williams to continue to say, oh, Kevin Hart is scared to be in the same building as me, and dropping all of these innuendos about what Kevin Hart might have had to do in order to get those roles and in order to blow up like that, I think it's coming from a place of bitterness because I never heard him say what Kevin Hart did to him. The same thing with Steve Harvey. I think, you know, he spoke about Steve Harvey doing Bernie Mac. Bernie Mac is another one of my favorite comedians. I can't believe I forgot about Bernie, but Bernie Mac also was somebody that was brought up. Kevin, Katt didn't, talk crap about Bernie, of course, but he was basically speaking about how, Steve Harvey did Bernie Mac dirty one time. I think he was offered a role in a movie or something, and Steve tried to go behind his back and go to the production company or the network and try to take the role from him. It was some shady, stuff like that, which I believe. But I never heard him say anything that Steve Harvey did to him. And if you notice, he kept using the word gatekeeping a lot. And I can see how Steve Harvey, is kind of one of the gatekeepers because he's one of the, king of comedies. And also with Steve Harvey, also with Katt Williams, he, brought up how he's actually writing new material. He bragged a lot about his intellect. And that is what brings me to the fact that his Mercury is in the first house. So the first house, that is the self, your physical body, the temperament, your environment, the way that a person acts. And when you have planets in the first house, especially if they are close to that ascendant, they will be personified within that person. So Katt Williams is like Mercury personified, and so he's a very mercurial person. Mercury is the head, the mind, the prankster, and rules the tongue and speech. Mercury also rules children, and so this gives him a very verbose nature. And it can show how, sometimes when you look at Katt Williams, he kind of acts like a little child with the way that he'll use different voices and stuff, and that's very mercurial of him as well. He also spoke about how he read a lot of books. I think he said he read 3,000 something books by age like 13, I'm not sure, but I do think he was exaggerating with that. And that's because he has a Mercury square Jupiter in his birth chart. Now, Mercury being in the first house can also make him be very androgynous. So if you notice, he kind of has that male female thing going on with the way that he acts, and that is a very mercurial thing to have. Even though it's in the sign of Leo, that to me is just making it a bit more flamboyant and boisterous. Now, when Mercury is in the sign of Leo, that does show where he does speak from the heart. So a lot of the things that he said, I do think that he really believes it, and I think that he really is passionate about it. You can see the passion when he speaks about these things. And with Mercury being in a fire sign, I always say that can be representative of inflammatory speech. And because it's in a sign like Leo, that's like having a fixed opinion. So he definitely was inflammatory with a lot of the things that he said, especially when he started talking about the Illuminati. Like, this interview was so interesting because my grandmother called me and was like, "What is the Illuminati?" I'm like, "Well, how do you know about this?" And she started talking about how one of her younger friends kept talking about Katt Williams and I was like, "Oh my God!" But he spoke about the Illuminati and particularly when he was talking about Ludacris. And so that was also very inflammatory because rarely do you have people in the industry who come out and say these things. And so I think that's another reason why people are like, oh my God, he's telling the truth. He's being so real. Is because he's saying these things. But in my opinion, it's like, I think most of us know that in Hollywood, there's like I don't know what you want to call it, but a secret organization or organization full of powerful people. I mean, there's only a few companies that rule Hollywood, and it's not a nice place. And so I'm pretty sure there's a lot of things that go on in Hollywood that are very disturbing, to say the least. But with that Mercury in a fire sign square Jupiter, they can just deal with, like, uh, uh, like it's like throwing gasoline on fire, so they can deal with him exaggerating a lot. So when you have Mercury square Jupiter, that is good for comedy because it can show where the person is good at making people laugh. Jupiter deals with humor. And this is a great position for anybody that is a writer because it can give you a wealth of ideas. And this does support him reading a lot of books. But Jupiter has the tendency to inflate things and blow shit out of proportion and make it something bigger than what it is. And I do believe that I saw some of that in the interview. Now, he may also have an overly inflated opinion of himself because Mercury is in the first house. So notice he had so much to say about other people, but he really didn't go into good detail about his own like shortcomings. He wanted to, in true Virgo fashion, he wanted to try to remain pure throughout the situation to seem as if he was innocent. But when you're somebody who's been arrested 19 times, he kind of tried to allude and say, oh, I'm gonna protect. I just made $300,000 in this city, so of course I'm gonna have a gun on me. So if you pull me over, I'm gonna have it on me, all the time. Or if he'll say I smoke weed, and so it relaxes me. So if you pull me over, you're gonna find it. And he made it seem like that was like the bulk of his arrest, but he got arrested for a lot of, you know, things that involve him like putting his hands on people, assaulting people, disorderly conduct, throwing shit at people, like, you know what I mean? So it's, you know, it's interesting how, because if you take the celebrity out of it, would you want to date somebody, or would you want your child to date somebody who has been arrested 19 times? So he really didn't explain away that. He kind of talked more so about how he read 3,000 books and how he, ran away from home at 13 or left home at 13 due to a dispute with his father, and kind of paints it like he's just this super smart genius kid who leaves home at 13 because of a dispute, and goes from there. But I felt like he left out a lot of detail about that, which definitely could have been covered within the 3 hour interview, because he spent more time again trash talking other people, and people like that, especially black people. We like watching people trash other people and talk shit and all that kind of stuff. And so he gave the people what they wanted. But that Mercury being in the first house is also ruling his second house. And the second house also represents the voice, and it represents money or livelihood and that which sustains us. And so that represents him being an entrepreneur or being responsible for how he earns his money, or him using his, him, Katt, the person, is making his money. A lot of times you may work somewhere, you may work on a product to provide a service, but the product or the service is Katt Williams, and that's representative of that ruler of the second in the first house. And the fact that it's square Jupiter, that can show where he does earn a lot of money. So I think he earns a lot of money doing his comedy specials. He spoke about having 14 comedy specials. And so he earns a lot of money. And that is one of the benefits to having that Mercury square Jupiter combination, because that's not a bad combination to have. Jupiter is a benefic at the end of the day. And Jupiter is in the sign of Scorpio, and it's angular in the fourth. And so this Jupiter, while it's peregrine, it can still provide abundance and wealth and a lot of his other significations. But Jupiter also is the planet that deals with overinflation and blowing things out of proportion. So whenever we see that, we have to, whenever you see that in a chart, you have to be very discerning about what you take for the truth when somebody with that aspect is talking to you. Now, the real clincher is that his Mercury is also square Neptune. So that Mercury at 20 is at the late degrees of Leo, and it's square and it's forming a dissociative square with Neptune at the early degrees of Sagittarius. And what that does is that also is a great aspect for an entertainer, as it will give a strong imagination. It's great for writing and artistic expression, and it can give somebody a very fantasy like mind, to where when he's on stage he can come up with a lot of these scenarios where you're like, how does he even think of that? Mercury square Neptune, I made a video about this a few months ago, but as good as this aspect is for actors and actresses, it's also a great aspect for liars. So this is somebody who can be deceptive with the things that they say, because Mercury represents the tongue and what we say, while Neptune represents deception, distortion, and things that just don't make no damn sense. Now, when you add in the fact that Mercury is squaring Jupiter and Neptune, that can give him the tendency to be gifted with being able to mislead other people and bamboozle others. And he may be successful at deceiving others, because the Jupiter is going to represent the success and the Neptune is going to represent the deceit. So that Mercury, Jupiter, Neptune really is good for him being able to come out, say something inflammatory with that Mercury in Leo, stir up a bunch of controversy, and be successful at, maybe deceiving people. So again, I have to take some of what he said with a grain of salt. And the fact that Mercury is ruling the second house, once again, that is responsible for him being an entrepreneur and having to earn money at an early age. But it could also point to overspending, having a huge budget where his money kind of dissolves or usurps. And he does have 7 kids. I know he adopted, I don't know, I think he has 2 biological and adopted 5. I may be wrong on that, I'm not sure, but if I remember correctly, he does have 7 children, and that costs a lot of money. So he may sometimes feel like money just dissolves. And again, that Mercury Jupiter is really providing him with some protection and the ability to earn a lot of money, but he may overspend, and that could be a problem at some point. Or he may just have a huge budget, and at some point that could be a problem because he could be overly optimistic about his good fortune. Now, Mercury also rules the 11th house, which is also showing that he earns a lot of money from his career, and that he is very aspirational. Like, he really, really wants to, he really set the goal high on what he wanted to be. So, that is somebody who wants to be, especially because Mercury is in Leo, somebody who wants to be a movie star, somebody who wants to be famous and wants to be distinguished and recognizable. And with Saturn being in the 11th house, that is showing how that is a major ambition of his. And so that was part of his dream. So you could say in that respect, he is blessed because he was able to make his dream come true. He was able to become a famous comic. Now, it may not be enough for him. Sometimes with Mercury, Jupiter is never enough, and Leo, being this solar sign, can just want to be number one. So, you know, I lost my track of thought. But that's fine, because I wanted to move on and talk about his sun. The sun in his chart is his chart ruler, and it's the primary significator for him. So we see his sun is in Virgo in the second house. And the second house, again, that's the house of the voice, the house of the money, the house of food. And so those would be central things in his life that, again, is another entrepreneurial aspect because ruler of the first and the second, or vice versa, can show where the person is responsible for earning their own keep. They're responsible for their livelihood. Now, some of the positive traits about him having his son in Virgo is going to be that he's a perfectionist. So one of the things that he bragged about was him being, a writer and having the ability to stand up to other people and voice his opinion about certain things that he didn't want to do in the movie. For instance, he was very adamant against not wearing a dress. He was very adamant against not playing a character that was going to be sexually abused. Even though I think Ice Cube came out and said that that was never in the original script. So that's another discrepancy right there. But anyways, that son that the positivity of that son of Virgo is going to allow him to be very analytical and precise and articulate. So he is an intellectual brother. I have to give him that. He's very smart. He's very well spoken, and he is very well read. But some of the negative traits of Virgo really spill out of him as well, and that can represent him being too verbose, overly critical and cynical. And Virgo can complain and complain and complain, and they want, if you've ever been around a Virgo or lived with a Virgo, you know that they have to voice their opinion. They have to get it out. It's part of that whole mercurial thing with them, and in that vein, they won't, you know, be quiet. And so they can, this is one of the aspects that could represent him creating, open enemies, especially because that sun is in a square to Saturn in that 11th house, and that Saturn is ruling that 7th house, and the 7th house can represent your open enemies. Now, his sun, as you can see, is with Venus. Venus is a benefic star, and that, because the sun is representing his temperament and who he is as a person, that does give him more of an effeminate nature because Venus is a planet that represents women. And so that is why he prefers the company of women. If you notice throughout the interview, he spoke about how he prefers, to have, female assistants, female chefs, women around him. And so that Sun Venus is the reason why, with that Sun Venus combination, he really does appreciate femininity. And that's not an aspect for somebody that's going to be a hardcore rugged guy. There's going to be somebody who likes entertainment, luxury, and that's somebody that really does prefer, for the most part, to kind of not get their hands too dirty. Now, with the Venus being in Virgo, another reason why he may prefer to hire women is because he may be more so tolerable of submissive women and women that work for him. He may have a hard time distinguishing himself from him and the women that he worked with, because when you got Venus that close to the sun, that means that when he was born, Venus was invisible. She was hidden by the massive light and heat of the sun. And so this Venus isn't able to be itself and be its own independent person. And so the women in his life may at times not may feel invisible, or may not feel like they're being seen. But this can just also point to like a secret marriage, or him keeping his relationships on a very low profile. Now, Sun Venus in general is also a great combination for an entertainer, because Venus is the natural significator for entertainment, and this is what gives him that charm and that ability to sway the public and really be able to be entertaining for a crowd. But in some cases, Sun Venus can point to narcissism, because the sun can represent like the self, the ego, and Venus is a very indulgent planet. And so when you pit the sun with Venus, a lot of times you'll hear these people, they want to be famous. They're gonna ask, am I gonna be famous? Am I gonna be this? Am I gonna be that? And in his chart, as you can see, Venus is the ruler of the 10th house, and that is one of the aspects that brought him fame, because the 10th house is the house that is the most visible. It represents high visibility, recognition, The top of the ladder being it represents fame, and so when him being with the ruler of the tenth, that is what brought him a lot of recognition and popularity, and because it's Venus that's dealing with it being through entertainment. This could also manifest as him resembling his mother because the 10th house represents the mother. Well, the ruler of the 10th house represents the mother. Now, that Sun Venus pairing is forming a square to Saturn and Gemini in the 11th house. And that really is going to be the main planetary combination that I'm kind of going to focus on for the rest of this video before I close out. Is because that is really the crux of the problem here. With Sun square Saturn, that's pointing to the issues that he had with his father. Him and his father got into a fight, and he ended up having to leave Cincinnati, Ohio, and move to Florida at the age of 13. And so the Sun Saturn square can show challenges with the father, and it can also point to hereditary issues. And so if he has any health issues, it could come from the paternal side of his family. This combination is also showing him as being very hardworking and him being able to somewhat maintain his position in life. But this combination can inhibit him in a lot of ways. The first way it's going to do it is through the physical body because the sun is the universal significator for the physical body, while Saturn is the planet that limits you or restricts you or cut things off. And so that is a lot of times when you got Sun and Saturn, that can show, an inhibition either on a physical and or mental level. And in his case, it is apparent more so on the physical level. So this is one of the aspects that is responsible for his short stature. And in general, it can show where with that Sun in Leo, he wants, not Sun in Leo, but with the Leo on the ascendant, he wants to be the king. He wants to be one of the top dogs. But with that square to Saturn in the 11th house, that's like somebody rejecting him or a group of people rejecting him and saying, no, you can't get in this club because the 11th house carries the meaning of our hopes and our wishes and our dreams, but it also represents our mentors, our peers, as well as our affiliates and our memberships and organizations. And so that Saturn can be like a group of men or men older than him, basically saying, no, you can't get in, you can't, get in. And what's interesting is that there's this Egyptian lot called the lot of kings and kingship, and Saturn is forming a square with that, and that can represent him not being allowed within the kingdom common. And so he kind of has a bone to pick with them. That's why he kept bringing up gatekeeping, because he feels like they are gatekeeping certain positions and places in within that specter of black comedy, I guess, and only giving the same thing to Kevin Hart and how come Steve Harvey gets everything, and Cedric the Entertainer had his own show, and stuff like that. So you can tell he's really bitter about that, and so he's taking on this effect of now being the underdog. So he comes out and he trashes them and he talks crap about them because it's like, if you won't let me in, then I'll. It's kind of like Killmonger in a way. Similar themes, if you don't let me in, then I'll burn the village down just to feel this warmth. And I think that's what's going on here. I feel like I just been talking, I haven't taken any breaths, but I really wanted to kind of get this out because it really was something that I felt like the general public really doesn't do a good job at reading things through and listening and comprehending what a lot of people are saying. Like, everybody's always talking about narcissism and narcissists, but when you have one right in front of you in the interview, nobody is able to pick up on that, and they don't, well, I think there's a much more dignified Leo way he could have went about this rather than the route that he took, which I actually think with that Saturn in the 11th house, and if I'm not mistaken, Saturn is like he's going through a Saturn square Saturn now, so that could potentially be like something that may impact his livelihood further on down the line. So um, he may have burned some bridges with that. But I don't want this video to be too long. I just wanted to talk about some of the things that I noticed about Katt Williams based on his chart. And a lot of it has to deal with that Sun Saturn. Um, that can just make him be, bitter, mean, and these people have to grow up fast because they have to take on a lot of responsibility at an early age, and so they may kind of look at people who they think had it easy, Kevin Hart, and they may kind of look at them like, especially if that person is doing better than them, they may look down on them and be kind of bitter about that. But this is also a combination that can show like a dislike of men or misandry, because Sun Saturn, Saturn, the Sun is men and Saturn can take away. So this is another one that, well, not another one, but this is also something that can be damaging in terms of his health, because Saturn is ruling the sixth house of illness and the Sun is the physical body. And so um, on one way this showed up is him, him being arrested that many times is putting a limitation on his movement. The mutable signs are associated with movement and travel, and with that square to the Sun that's representing his a sort of inhibition and the authority figure kind of coming down on him. And Venus is also involved in that square, and that's gonna point to the issues with relationships. And so um, he may find it difficult to get married. If you do get married, it could end in divorce with that Venus square Saturn. Um, because Saturn is in the 11th and opposite that Neptune, that could show where he may have issues with the authorities or a governing agency over child neglect, because Neptune is in the fifth house. And if I'm not mistaken, he did have CPS calling him one time. So the bottom line for this video is to just think twice about idolizing celebrities. And when you watch a celebrity, try to take the fact that they're famous out of it, and let's see them for who they really are. This is no hate towards him. He is somebody who is very talented and um, has a lot going for him. But I think he has a lot of issues, and I think a lot of his issues revolve around, Venusian things. I don't think that he's somebody that can really be in a relationship or be married or really enjoy himself. He seems maybe very inhibited in terms of his love life as well. And I think he's overcompensating with this ego and the fact that he's not being led into certain organizations. But also go and rewatch that interview he had with Wanda. A lot of people think that Wanda started with him, but if you watch the interview from the beginning, you'll notice that once Wanda started big upping Tiffany Haddish, someone who I guess Katt Williams is not a fan of, that's when he really started to go in on her and baited her into getting into a roast session with him in which he annihilated her. She was just ill equipped, but again, he's one of those people where if you have an opinion that's different than his, he can't handle that, and he can um, go on the attack. So I hope you all found this video informative and entertaining, and yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to watching some more of his specials and all of that. I'm still a fan of his work, but not the person.